Meanwhile, on the comic box, I wonder, I wonder, why, I know why, you ran away, and I wonder where you will stay, yeah, my little runaway, run away, ciao. Comics. Hello, everyone, and welcome to issue 77 of The Comic Box, part of the Geek to Geek podcast network. I am Rob, your friendly neighborhood comic geek, and this week we are talking Runaways, the Hulu original series based on the Marvel comic by Brian K. Vaughan and Adrian Alfona. But first, the Weekly Geekery. Weekly Geekery. So obviously, I have been watching Runaways. I watched the first 4 episodes. As of this recording, I believe there are 5 out on Hulu. But I watched the first 3, which were released together as sort of its own introduction to everything. And then the 4th episode. And I can't tell you what I think about it. Not yet. We'll get to that. My other geekery this week is I downloaded Marvel Unlimited. There was a free month that you could get by using, I think it was Punisher was the code, and they gave you a free first month. And I have never really dug in and tried it before, and I'm enjoying it. I think it's a nice balance between that and Hoopla. Considering Hoopla is free from my local library, I feel like that I get, 5 downloads a month, so picture 5 different trade paperbacks, plus normally it's $10 a month for Marvel Unlimited. And the amount of comics that I read for this, and specifically the amount of comics I know I'm going to be reading from Marvel as we continue going through the different Marvel movies and television shows, I think I might stick with it. I don't know. I haven't played around. There's a feature on there where you can actually go panel by panel, or even within a panel, word balloon by word balloon. They give you sort of a dynamic reading experience of knowing where your eyes should go. Haven't played around with that too much. I still like seeing the full page because I think the layout can be a big part of how they want you to interpret. The size of the frame is almost the amount of time they expect you to look at it, I guess, if you will. Sort of the length of the cut if you were watching a movie or a television show. But what I like about Marvel Unlimited versus, say, Hoopla is first the ability to sort by character, or they have some story arcs. They don't have a ton, so don't expect like mini arcs within a series, but they have some of the larger ones out there that I think you can just click on and start reading all of the comics that are involved, I think. I haven't played around too much with it. I read the first volume of Runaways, and then I started reading Mark Waid's Daredevil on there, and that's pretty much as far as I got. But I like that you need an internet connection, but I like that you don't need to download every, issue as you read it. They don't seem to have things on there in trades, which is too bad. I would prefer just to say, give me volume 1 of this comic and I'll go, like I do on Hoopla. But with the Hoopla app, you need to download that and, digitally borrow it from the library and download it to your device in order to read it. With Marvel Unlimited, you don't have to do that so long as you have an internet connection. So I didn't need to spend that time waiting for a comic to download. I could just keep tapping next and read the next comic, and made it through all 18 issues of the original run of Runaways. Over on Hoopla, I read Brandon Sanderson's White Sand Volume 1, and this was strictly because I was flipping through new additions to Hoopla or something. With that app, I like finding things I've never read before, so I have something new to talk about on here besides, continuing to read stuff that we all know. And Beej in particular, over on the Geek to Geek podcast, cannot stop talking about how much he loves Brandon Sanderson, which is fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But so when I saw the name on Hoopla, I was like, all right, I got to give this a read. And I feel like it's similar maybe to some of the stuff that I've heard Beej talk about in his other books. Apparently, White Sand was like his first book, or one of his first books that he wrote but never got published. And so after years and lots of rewriting, he eventually decided to give it a shot as a comic book. And it's about, I think, a planet or an island where there are all of these different types of people that live here. It's sort of a desert-like world. And the main character is from a tribe of people who can do magic where they control the sand. And so it starts out with him trying to gain this high rank of like a sand magician, except he isn't as strong as the others. His sand magic isn't as strong, but it's more refined. So he can only control one ribbon of sand, as they call it, at a time, where the others can control dozens of sand ribbons that let them fly or build things, move things, whatever. Think sand kinesis. I don't know what that would be. If pyrokinesis is fire, I don't know what sand kinesis is. Very small rocks. But it was fine. It was fine. Things happen. I don't want to spoil it, but the story takes a sharp left, and then we get introduced to some of these other places around this world. I guess if I found a volume 2, I would probably keep reading it. I think that's more because I'm a completionist than anything else. I wasn't really hooked into any of the characters because I felt like it was mostly a lot of world building here. But I think if you're a fantasy fan, this is going to hit all of the right chords with you because the characters are very different, interesting. There's backstory to dig into that they don't reveal to you. The costumes are very well drawn. Like I would love to see this like on the air. You know, I'd love to see this as a TV show or a movie just because of the costumes designs and the world design that the artist put in there. I think they did a good job. And it's not really heavy on the inks either. So the art in the book almost looks more like illustrations you would find in a book rather than a comic book illustration, if that makes sense. It's sort of hard. Google White Sand Volume 1 or Brandon Sanderson's White Sand, and you'll see what I mean. Beyond that, the wife and I are still playing Lego Harry Potter. I think I mentioned this last week. We are now on the 3rd book/movie. They're mostly based off of the movies, obviously, because it's the Warner Brothers thing. I might have said this last time, but you can totally tell that this is an older Lego game because you can't. Like in Marvel Superheroes, you hit the Y button and you could change into whatever character you've unlocked at that point. But in Lego Harry Potter, you need to find a room that has a cauldron of Polyjuice Potion. Sometimes you have to find the items to make that Polyjuice Potion, and then you're able to turn into the characters that you have. And that just feels like a lot of extra work. Plus, there are so many like little levels, and then like when you learn new spells, it's not as part of a level, it's part of the free roaming around the castle, but you're still only allowed into the certain areas. So it's this weird cross between free roaming and being on the rails of the story, I guess, within this open area. And I feel like Marvel Superheroes did that a little bit too, where you couldn't go beyond a certain area until you'd played the appropriate level. But we're realizing that there's just a ton of stuff we're going to have to do once we get all of the characters we need to unlock certain things or do certain actions and levels to go back and get 100%. So I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. We bought both of the Lego Harry Potter games, and I just don't know if we're going to need to like take a break between the two of them because I feel like this one is going to be a bit more of a slog to get to 100%. Versus, say, the last one we did, which was Lego Jurassic World. Last thing that I have is just chatting with our fellow geeks on Reddit and on Slack. I posted something to the Harry Potter subreddit about the way that sentient life, is treated in the Harry Potter universe. I just finished rereading the second Harry Potter book, Chamber of Secrets, and thinking about the way that they treat the mandrakes in that story and them having what appears to be near human sentience, or things like the Weasley's car that seems to have near human levels of a near human level of sentience, and the way that we treat that so crassly. I mean, in the end, it's a kid's book, and that's the reason why. It's a kid's book, so it's funny that we taught a car to fly, and in the end, it drives itself into the woods and becomes wild. Like, obviously, we're digging into it way, way too much to be having that type of philosophical conversation about a series of books for kids, and I totally understand that. But it's just one of those things where now that I'm older and you're going back and you're reading through the books again, and Professor Sprout is talking about how they're, getting moody, so they're teenagers now, and eventually they're going to move into one another's pots, and then we'll be ready to chop them up and stew them. And it's like, my God, like if they cry as babies when you take them out of the pot, does that mean they scream as they're chopped up as adults? And Sprout's just happily, I don't know. So there's a lot of conversation to be had there. And a lot of people have been posting and sort of the difference or the similarities between that and the way Americans treat livestock. And some of it got kind of political for me, where I was more looking to have a fun conversation. But that's my weekly geekery. So let's get into some news, because I have news for you guys this week. I decided I was going to make the topic a little shorter because there's news stories that I want to throw out there. So we're going to go news. Starting with Marvel. Marvel Comics, which are like comics, but cry a lot, like colicky children. I have an X-Men spoiler for you. So spoiler for the X-Men comic in 3, 2, and 1. Professor X is back. Again. From the dead. Again. Yay. Except this time he's in the body of Phantom X, who gave it up to atone for past sins. End of spoiler. As for that news story, I guess, whatever. Like, there's a new movie coming out, so things are going to have to go back sort of to center, I guess, before that movie. Speaking of which, there was an image released of Dark Phoenix. And it's Sophie Turner, who is... Oh, wow. Really? Really? Did I just brain fart on Game of Thrones? My nerd cred has gone completely out the window. That's fine. Sansa Stark. I knew it. It just took me a second. When I do this stream of conscious thing, the details can slip away. But there's a couple is of her. I haven't gotten a good look at them yet. I can try and find one and throw a link in the show notes. It mostly looked like they were shooting her from sort of just below the neck up, and she wasn't wearing clothes and she was on fire. So that's cool, I guess. I don't know. We kind of did Dark Phoenix already, so I look forward to seeing what they do with it again, I guess. But I feel like we've had a couple of movies now with this new lineup of X-Men characters, and I don't feel like they put in the work to make us emotionally invested in any of them. I feel like they sort of tried with Beast and kind of with Mystique, except she's sort of all over the place because they didn't really know what they were going to do with her between the different movies, because they didn't know if she was supposed to grow up to become Rebecca Romaine and be very much just on the side of Magneto, or how they were going to play with that. So I will say Magneto, I think we had good luck with over the last couple movies, but not so much Apocalypse. I thought Apocalypse was weird, where he's like, I have a new family and they're lost again. Well, now I'm angry a second time. But anyway, so that's coming. That's Marvel movie news. While we're talking Marvel movie news, I guess, there's this Disney Fox thing, right? And I feel like I could spend a whole episode just with somebody shooting back and forth, throwing random ideas, because it was off for a while. Then now it sounds like it's back on. This is the idea of Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox. So Fox News and Fox Sports are still going to be a thing, but if this merger, buyout, whatever goes through, Disney is going to take over all of the intellectual properties that Fox has, which would mean for us comic book fans, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, which means Silver Surfer, Galactus, all these characters that played into the original Infinity Gauntlet comic book would now be within Marvel's ability to use. And that's cool. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where, the ball is already rolling. So it was sort of like, okay, we were okay with how they managed to squeeze Spider-Man in there, but we know it was rushed. That, we're going to, throw Spider-Man in the middle of Civil War. How are we going to work that? Okay, now we need to make a new Spider-Man movie before anything else. What is that going to mean if Disney gets a hold of Fox? Does that mean everything goes on halt so we can get a movie or two of their new version of the X-Men and the Fantastic Four in order to throw them into... It's got to be Avengers 4, right? Because Infinity War is it wrapped? Or it's close to being wrapped? But look, if it happens, go back into the editing room. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of throwback flashback scene to Thanos' origins. Give me one shot of the Silver Surfer and Galactus, like in the background. I don't care. But to not have the Silver Surfer involved in the Infinity story is a shame. And if they're going to get more cosmic with Marvel... I need that Silver Surfer movie. And I need a good Silver Surfer movie. I mean, yes, his story started with him on Earth fighting against Galactus, who is a giant dude, not a weird cloud. Fox. I mean, ridiculous. Fox. But to have, almost a philosophical, or even do the lighter adventuring, exploring theme. Think, the last Silver Surfer run that just wrapped up is basically Guardians of the Galaxy 2 when they first come down on Ego and they're just flying around looking amazed and laughing at all the incredible things they're seeing. There's an entire series of that. It is the last Fantastic Four run. And of course, there's all the heartbreaking moments and stuff as well that match with the light. But however, I get it. I'm looking forward to seeing if Disney/Marvel can pull off a new Silver Surfer movie. And if we're not quite all the way there with the Avengers stuff and how the Infinity storyline might wrap up, if it's going to leak into an Avengers 4, I would like to see the Silver Surfer in there somewhere, please. And thank you. That was a lot of talking about that. I apologize. The New Mutants now has a poster, and it looks very spooky. It kind of looks like the poster for, is it The Frighteners that had a similar poster? It's something you've kind of seen before, but very cool. And there's also another photo that was released of the cast that's made to look like the cover of an AC/DC album. So link in the show notes on the New Mutants film Twitter account shared the poster. So I hope Joe gets a good look at that and gets all excited. Because again, I'm not a giant New Mutants guy. I never got into the comics. So, but now if I have Marvel Unlimited, I suppose I can go back and acquaint myself with it. And what I can only imagine is a giant slog through the 80s of New Mutants books and pouches everywhere and gritted teeth and large muscles. Marvel TV news. We got an image released of Jessica Jones Season 2, and spoilers in 3, 2, and 1. We see the Purple Man again, Kilgrave. I'm going to assume that's all going to be in her head, and I'm hoping, I understand that her whole deal is dealing with her past, and Season 2 she has to deal with her actions in Season 1, but I really hope that instead of continuing to dwell on that, they push past that and move into a new detective story. I'm hoping we don't get a whole season of the same thing again, because that's stagnant for the character. And even though some people like doing a Monster of the Week every week for years on shows, I like the idea of these Marvel shows continuing to push forward into new territory. Marvel Quick Hits, one interesting here. A Wolverine scripted podcast is on the way. Marvel's first scripted podcast, inspired by Serial and those types of I know there was a name of another one, and it was the one that Beach's wife mentioned in their episode on woodworking, of the only podcast that she listens to. But it's like serialized storytelling. It's going to be called Wolverine the Long Night, because they needed to get to that name before Batman. It doesn't sound like a Wolverine name. It sounds like a Batman title, but whatever. Wolverine's being voiced by Richard Armitage, who is Thorn Oakenshield in the Hobbit movies, which I think is a good choice for the voice. It's low and it's gravelly and carries with it, I think, the necessary power. But here's the downside. It's only going to be available through Stitcher Premium, which is stupid. That's stupid. It should be available everywhere. Come on, Marvel. Does Disney not have enough money? Be the good drug dealers of content you are, and give us our first taste for free. Make it available to everybody, and then lead us to your special, $10 a month Marvel podcast app in order to get access to the rest of the stuff like DC is doing. Either way, maybe it'll become available eventually. I'd love to do a review of it. I'd love to listen to it, but I don't have Stitcher Premium, so if somebody else out there does, let me know. DC. Television news, we got our first look at Dick Grayson's Robin costume for the DC streaming app's Titan show. See how I let that roll in with those extra paid apps just to get content you could hopefully get through a different provider? Anyway, the costume looks pretty good. It's kind of Dark Knight looking with the armor plating. It's very more Tim Drake than it is Dick Grayson, but I think that's probably smart. We see it from sort of the chest up, but I'm guessing that we're not going to have to deal with the lack of pants on Dick's original costume, which would be preferable, because we don't need a lack of pants on Dick. There's been enough of that, I think, right? We like our characters in pants. Yep, that's what I meant by that comment, and nothing else. Link in the show notes for that picture. DC movie news, Warner's John Berg has reportedly been booted from DC Films' production division, so expect to see maybe some restructuring on their end. We already have our first image of Aquaman in Aquaman, so, everybody's welcome to go look at that and either swoon or just feel like they really, really need to go to the gym. But beyond that, there's all of these other movies that DC is supposedly putting out there. But there might be some restructuring after the critical happening of Justice League. I don't know if it was down the middle, very positive, very negative. I generally don't go out and seek out reviews other than those we get to hear on our podcast network. So, I don't know. I mean, I've heard good things and bad things about Justice League, but clearly I think they're realizing that they might be headed in the wrong direction with their films. If there's somebody new as the head of their production division, that could mean significant changes down the line, both to what films we get and when we get them. We also have casting news, though, concerning these other movies supposedly going on. So we have casting for the Shazam movie, and it's Jack blah blah blah. Excuse me. It's Jack Dylan Grazer. It's Jack Dylan Grazer is the kid who like didn't want to do anything and then like got his arm broken. Spoilers in It, the movie with the evil clown. So the kid with the inhaler, that kid is going to be Freddie Freeman in the Shazam movie. Freddie Freeman is Captain Marvel Jr. And I know this is going to get really confusing for those people out there that aren't as familiar with comic books. So the character of Shazam, who is basically, he looks like Superman, except he's in an all-red suit with a yellow lightning bolt and a cape that usually only hangs off of one shoulder, a white cape. This is the character of, traditionally, Captain Marvel, who is given his abilities by a wizard named Shazam. But because of the confusion between this character and Marvel's Captain Marvel, this character has been renamed Shazam, which is weird because that's the mystical word he says in order to, he calls basically on the wizard Shazam to get his powers and then says it again and turns into a boy. And that sounds really weird when I say it that way. But the point is, it's stupid for his name to be Shazam if that's the word he says to get his powers. Similarly, Captain Marvel Jr., one of his sidekicks, eventually changes his name to CM3, which is silly, but is what he calls himself in the comics because were he to say Captain Marvel Jr., he would lose his powers because he gets them by saying Captain Marvel. Clearly, we're going to need to do an episode about this at some point because it is ridiculous. The point is, I don't know what his character is called in the New 52. Does that mean he's Shazam Jr.? I have no idea, but either way, I thought that kid did a good job in It, so hooray for a Freddie Freeman in the Shazam movie, assuming it still happens. That's it. That's the news. Let's get to our topic of the week right after this commercial break where we get to hear about the other amazing shows on the Geek to Geek Podcast Network.
I'm Void.
And I'm Beej.
And together, we're the Geek to Geek Podcast. Well, we make it. It is kind of us, but I guess it's separate.
Every week, we pick a topic from geek or digital culture and chat about it for a while.
And you're invited. We talk about books and movies, games, comics, the internet.
Or really whatever we feel like.
Yeah, that too.
So look for the Geek to Geek podcast on iTunes.
Or wherever your podcasts are sold, or downloaded, or whatever.
Hey everyone, I'm Katie.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're the hosts of the podcast
Tea Time with Katie and Chelsea.
We are two best friends who love pop culture. We try to have a female perspective on things, but we really just talk about anything we like. What are some recent topics we've done, Katie?
Well, we've talked about girl power songs, Wonder Woman, Veronica Mars, young adult fiction novels, San Diego Comic-Con, and so much more. So grab your cup of tea or whatever your drink of choice is and download our podcast on iTunes or Stitcher and start listening today.
Hi, my name is Joe Hogan, and I'm a geek. And if you're currently listening to this, there's a good chance you're a geek too. So check out my podcast, Geektitude. Each week, I talk with somebody about their geek aptitude. Sometimes I talk to people in a geeky profession. Sometimes it's someone doing something really cool with their geekiness. Often it's another geeky podcaster. But it's always someone who wants to share their inner geek. So join me each week as we come together to geek out about all the geeky stuff we love. And remember, this week, keep it geek.
And we are back. Please head to GeektoGeekCast.com where you can take a look at all of our shows and see if any of them tickle your fancy. It's been a good week. I've enjoyed all the shows. There was like a random catching up episode of the Geek to Geek podcast. Geektitude did an episode talking with Raven from Girls Gone WoW, which is awesome. We need more accents just in general on the podcast, I think. I think that's the thing we need to shoot for, is a diversity of accents on the thing. But here's the big thing I wanted to say. Every single one of the shows said something nice about me this week, and it was really nice. It was nice. It felt so good. It was so good to be loved. But no, I do want to say I do really appreciate it. So shout out to all of the other wonderful hosts. Everybody had something good to say, either about me hosting Geektitude's 100th episode or my Avengers Infinity War trailer episode from last week. So thank you, everybody. I do appreciate it. And please return the compliment and go and listen to all of their shows. Now, let's get on to our topic of the week with some topic of the week. Run, Runaways. Runaways, like I said, comic book originally written in the, I didn't actually look this up, early 2000s, I believe. It's often considered a really good jumping on point for people who don't really read comic books, which is actually true of a lot of Brian K. Vaughan stuff. Saga being the one that's currently going on right now, that is often considered a really good jumping on point for readers. However, I will say that if you do suggest the comic book to somebody, that first volume, and if you read it along with us for our homework, it is a bit dated, isn't it? Like, it feels weird that it should be, because for so many years, everybody's like, oh yeah, no, Runaways. If I need to suggest a comic for somebody who doesn't read comic books, I suggest Runaways, because there's, Marvel stuff, it's in the Marvel universe, and they kind of have powers, but they're not really superheroes. They don't know what they are. All they know is they need to get away from their parents. So, but that said, I actually think the show, my spoiler-free review, I like the show. I do. I enjoy it. It's very CW, and I think that's actually a good thing in this case, because I think that means the show is going to do a better job of introducing you to the very edited version, mind you, of the story from the comic books. But I think it's aimed at that younger audience, the characters to whom these will be more relatable, because we really don't have any teenagers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as it exists right now. We don't really have those young characters for people to turn to. So now we have that with the Runaways. And eventually, if the New Mutants, I guess, get bought out, they could be considered. But we're not going to do that. We're not going to play the X-Men card. I think it's important for that to happen, and I think it's important for that to be modified the way that, and I think the changes they did are very interesting, which is weird, again, because normally I would be the kind of person that's like, no, this is the comic book. If you're adapting the comic, adapt the comic. Stop throwing in random changes because you think it's a good idea, because that's how we end up with the animated Killing Joke where Batman and Batgirl have sex together, which is just, it doesn't, I'm sorry, no, you don't do those kinds of things. But somehow here, I'm actually okay with it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go over some of the comics versus the show changes. There's going to be some spoilers in here, maybe, for the show, because I'm going to talk about how things go in the comics a little bit. And I'm going to sort of talk about my thoughts on the characters as I go through a little more organically than splitting it up. The last thing I'll say, spoiler-free, is I like the way they're handling the parents versus the kids as well. It feels kind of like the Netflix show where we're jumping back and forth, and there's still some mystery as to what exactly the parents are up to, where in the comics, I think it becomes a little more clear, a little more quickly, at least. The hints are dropped where it makes a little more sense more quickly, but also there's a lot of differences. So let's get into that now. I will just say the end of my spoiler-free thoughts are, I like the show. I think the cast is doing a really good job. And I am surprised that even though they made the number of changes they did, and as significant as the changes are, I still don't mind it. If it gets too CW for me, I'm going to start floating away. I can tell you that right now. And I kind of expect that to happen because of some of the changes. But overall, I think it's a good show. I think Katie and Chelsea need to do a whole episode on it, but I understand that apparently Hulu doesn't reach the Emerald Isle, so that is unfortunate. But that doesn't mean there aren't alternate means of finding ways to watch shows. I support nothing illegal openly on this podcast. Now, let's move into our spoiler territory, or rather just our comics versus the show. First off, the show seems predicated originally on this idea of Nico Minoru's sister having died and the mystery surrounding it. I'm only up through 4 episodes, but we have some sort of weird flashback where it's like the family locks everything down when this person dies, and, cops show up that are involved in what is called the Pride. I suppose, do we need to do that first? Do we need to say Runaways is about a group of kids from diverse backgrounds? Each of their parents does something different. In the comics, they find out they're different types of supervillains, which we'll get into. And they believe they see them kill somebody, or they see them kill somebody. And so they decide to run away and figure out what to do with their lives and the knowledge that they have, knowing that they can't go to the police because the police are owned by their parents. Their parents are part of an evil group called not the Cabal, derp. They're part of an evil group they call the Pride. In the television show, the Pride is a nonprofit organization. Everybody is stupid rich, and all of their parents are members of this, and through their various work that they actually do legitimately in the world. So that's the general plot, is figuring out what the parents are up to and the kids trying to figure out how to survive on their own. So in the television show, we have this whole thing of Nico Minoru's sister being dead, who supposedly was Alex Wilder's best friend or whatever. That character, that sister, does not exist in the comics, at least in the first volume. I'm not going to try and pull retcons or things that might have been introduced later on in the later runs. I've read it all, but it's been years. So in the main first story arc of the Runaways, there is no Minoru sister. The parents, each of them wear supervillain costumes, like straight up supervillain costumes, instead of just the robes that they're shown wearing. One of the groups of parents are wearing robes because they are sorcerers, the Nico's parents. So I'm going to kind of go down the line because I think this is one of the good places to sort of separate the difference here, because this is where the show made a lot of changes, I think, to humanize the parents and make it more palatable for us to follow their story and maybe even care a little bit about those characters, or at least see ourselves in them being worried about their kids. So first, Gert and Molly are not siblings, even adopted siblings. In the show, we find out that Molly's parents were members of the Pride and then were killed or something happened to them, and then they were adopted by Gert's parents. And then Molly has this strength, but we don't know where any of that comes from. They're not siblings in the comic. However, the relationship is similar in that Gert is usually the one that is left behind to look after Molly, or in general is the one looking after Molly. And she does that kind of naturally. She is similar in the show, where in the show she talks about the patriarchy and that sort of thing. In the comic books, she is more against capitalism and sort of thing. She talks about her parents not letting her join a socialist group. And when eventually they run away, she suggests superhero names for everybody instead of using their, and I'm using finger quotes on my end here, slave names, which I don't think would fly right now. So I wouldn't expect that part to pop up. But she is very much sort of the one who thinks, no, Molly, you can do whatever you want. Our parents are evil. You can eat what you want, stay up as late as you want, do that sort of thing because you shouldn't be controlled. And I like that angle because that's the way that like a 15-year-old might think about it, because they're running away from home. So I hope we get some of that. One of the big differences here is the age. Molly in the comic books is only 11, and here she seems 13, maybe 14-ish. I know they're trying to play her younger, but she looks closer in age to the other actors to me. And the other actors all seem like they're 17, 18 years old. They're all driving super expensive cars. Like in the comics, Chase is the only one who's over 16, and he drives a dirty van. And he does it because he can drop off the grid and swap out license plates, and he's one of thousands of other white vans out there. So also, again, probably stuff you wouldn't see pop up here. Let's get to some of the parents. Gert's parents, and in the show, I guess Gert and Molly's parents, are biological engineers, I guess. Not so in the comics. They are legitimate time travelers. And the reason that they're, and spoilers for the show, obviously, people, the reason that the velociraptor that they have listens to Gert is because it was programmed to in the future. They went far into the future and got this thing made for their child, and then it was sort of like locked away with their copy of what they call the abstract, which is sort of the book, the history of the Pride and everything they're doing, which was going to be left behind for Gert in the event of the parents' death. It was going to be instructions on what to do, what they did, and say, we left this behind to guard you in our absence. We got a velociraptor made that listens to your commands, and you have an empathic connection. So like when the velociraptor gets hurt, Gert also feels it, which is kind of the downside of that whole thing. So it's not just that Gert sings and it goes through a vent and this biologically engineered Jurassic Park dinosaur that they keep in their basement that the parents have never, or the kids have never even seen before. Even though clearly it's their job to go down and feed the animals, they have no idea what that giant vault door is. That seemed weird. That was a weird thing in the show. That's there, but they don't ever look through the, like, come on, they're kids. Like, they're going to look through the window. If the door was behind a secret panel or something, maybe that would make sense. But anyway, Gert's parents are not biologists. They are time travelers. Nico's parents are sorcerers. And they use the staff of one, but it gets embedded inside Nico's body. And then the only way for it to be released is for her to physically cut herself. She needs to bleed. Though there is an issue where she is able to call the staff forth without physically cutting herself because she was already bleeding. And I thought that was kind of an interesting take, because clearly that would have been a fan question of, well, you know, what about menstruation? Does that count? And yes, it does. But the idea being, I don't think we're going to see that either. I don't think we're going to see the goth chick needing to cut herself to get the staff. Clearly, the way they're doing it on the show is the staff exists as like a smaller thing, and it pricks your finger and gets bled that way. And then the staff emerges, which was always kind of a thing in the comics for me. It's like, if you need to bleed, how much? Like, can you just prick a finger? Because she usually takes like a switchblade and like makes a small cut in her hand or something like that in order to get the staff. And it's when the blood is shed, the staff of one emerges. I'm okay, I think, with the way that the TV show is doing that. As far as Molly's parents are concerned, they're mutants. And I know we talked about this in our prep episode for it, but they're straight up mutants with psychic abilities. And in the show, we're introduced to this chemical that Gert's parents make that allows you to wipe somebody's memories. That's done by Molly's parents. They are totally around and alive in the comic book, and they eventually wipe the minds of, spoilers, Cloak and Dagger, and they talk about maybe wiping their kids' minds because they're not old enough to understand everything that the Pride is doing. But they, I think, decide not to do it because it would be too dangerous, and they don't know if it would hurt them. So, I like the way that the show is handling it, because I think it's more in tune with the MCU of technology, instead of, obviously they can't use mutants, but instead, I guess, of doing Inhumans or something. So Molly's powers work the same. She gets upset or she gets scared. She has this super strength, which wipes her out, and then she needs to sleep. She's very exhausted. But her parents, totally different. I mean, I guess they don't really talk about what her parents were or could do. Carolinas or Carolinas, I don't know how they keep pronouncing it in the show. Her parents are aliens, straight up aliens from a different planet, both of them. And both of them are Hollywood actors. So the whole Church of the, what do they call it? The Gibborim in the thing. That word is going to come to play later when I drop major spoilers for the comic book on you guys. But there is no like pseudo Scientology religion thing going on in the comics. But because of the way that they have established the show, because of the way that they built the show and the framework of the show, I think that's actually really interesting, because it adds another spin to the character. It adds another level of intrigue to the show. I don't know what the heck is going on, spoilers for the TV show, with the old dude, because that has nothing to do with anything in the comic books, as far as I'm aware. Absolutely nothing. So very interested to see how that is going to go. But they're all just aliens, and so she wears a bracelet, and it's like a medical bracelet is the reason she never takes it off, is because she has to wear it in case something happens to her, and she's found that she's, allergic to penicillin or whatever you would have a medical bracelet to let people know. And she's like, I don't even remember ever taking it off. And she takes it off, and then there is no house party. There is no high school at all in here, really. They're not hiding in high school. There's no friends from high school giving people crap. There's no attempted assault. There's no party drugs being passed around. That is all strictly from the television show in order to add drama and depth to the characters, which, again, for the most part, I guess I'm okay with. It's a completely different thing, but I understand why they do it, because if you want to have characters that kids can relate to and teenagers can relate to, put them in high school, because high school is awful. And especially if the whole thing is trying to figure out where you belong and what to do with yourself, throwing somebody in high school makes absolute sense. So I get it, but in the comic book, no, there is no Church of the Gibborim. Chase's folks, yes, mechanical geniuses. Yes, Chase is sort of abused by his dad, but his dad is not like this Tony Stark surrogate more like they have a regular house and like a shed in the backyard and then a basement under that with all of the super science. Like they keep up appearances. They are not super rich. And even Carolina's parents that are Hollywood actors are like, have a really nice like apartment looking thing, like a penthouse kind of thing. So there's not the people with the really nice house are the Wilders because they are, I don't even know if they say it that it's real estate in the, maybe it is that, yeah, the real estate in the comic book. But Chase's folks are actually kind of white trashy. So again, adding that other layer to the characters in the comics that we don't get in the show this time. This time, the show doesn't have that layer because everybody has to be super, super rich because it's like the OC and they all need to drive nice cars and live in mansions, which I guess, but like, I don't know. I guess the idea is they're all living in an affluent area and go to this rich kid's school and whatever, so it works. But that's a huge difference, is their parents are not all super rich. Or if they are, they don't appear to be super rich. They have appearances of being normal parents. In the comic book, Chase is still a good guy at heart, and he does mention lacrosse once, but it's not at all the way that we have it in the show. He is not that much of this pretty boy. He more so has like this, how would I put it? A white kid that listens to Limp Bizkit. If you're old enough, you'll understand what I mean when I say that. Like, Alex always gets upset because Chase calls him bro and brother. He uses words like gay and retarded, and he gets reprimanded from the others for doing that, especially in one case, which I don't know if I can spoil because I think that's going to be a show thing. But yeah, he doesn't have this mechanical genius. He figures out how to use the fistigons, but they're his parents' creation, and they let him shoot fire and then like create objects out of fire, like a Green Lantern kind of thing, but out of fire. And they're not just normal looking gloves. They have like these really long metal fingers that stick out from like a base thing that his hands are in. So it looks like he has oversized metal hands that shoot fire and can kind of control the fire that it makes. Almost like mimicking the special abilities of Pyro from the X-Men movies, I guess. Maybe that makes sense. So Chase is very kind of different in the comics in that way. Like he's clearly this, hates his parents, loves the idea. He already has a base for them to go to, which is this collapsed, abandoned hotel that he calls the hostel, where everybody hides from their parents. And it's a cave that looks like the entrance to the Bat Cave. And he has a sign out in front that says like gamma testing, which ties into the Marvel universe. You know, again, this is in the comics, in order to keep other people out. And that's where he goes to run away from his parents and do his own thing and drive his van over there. So like, it's a very different image of who Chase is in the comics versus on the show. He's a pretty rich white kid who plays lacrosse and also is a mechanical genius somehow. So like, yeah, everybody's really special on the show and not necessarily so much in the comic, which helped diversify the cast because you had these people that had special abilities and then you had him who he had these things he stole from his parents, and the rest is he's just sort of one of the more fearless characters and is willing to go out and put himself out there and do things. Alex Wilder, very much still Alex Wilder. That character is one of the ones that's very much closer to anybody else in the comic. He starts out playing video games, but the comic points out right away that he's considered a prodigy when it comes to strategy, and that sort of lays the groundwork for him becoming kind of the de facto leader of the group. Rather, in the show, they do this whole thing where he just wants all the kids to get back together and that sort of thing. That's not... In the comic book, it's true that he doesn't really have a ton of friends. His friends are online, and he talks about that in the comic book. But in the comic, they're all just, the kids get dragged to the parents' event, and then they all sit together in the room and decide to spy on their parents. Like, that's a thing that happens without provocation. That's like issue 1 of the comic book. Versus on the show, it's like, oh, I'm going to send texts and everybody's going to go out and do their own thing so that we can be introduced to each of these characters, which is why they did it, was to give time for us to get to know all of them before we bring them together. Small difference, but I think one that clearly draws, differences to the show. In the comic, they just launch into it and you get to know the characters along the way through the way they act and speak and whatever. Whereas on the show, everybody gets their own little time for us to get to know them as characters. So clearly, the show is going its own route. And I don't know if they're going to turn the first volume into this first season. I think the season is like, what do they say? It's going to be 10 episodes or something like that. I wouldn't expect to see Cloak and Dagger, though it'd be cool if they did an introduction of those characters already in costume doing their thing, and then we swapped over to the Cloak and Dagger TV show that's coming out on the Freeform network. I think that'd be really interesting. But there's 2 issues that have to do spoilers, okay? In the comics, they deal with like vampires, and I don't see the show necessarily doing that because Marvel Cinematic Universe does not have vampires right now. And so I don't know if they want to open that door yet until it's time to open that door, because Blade still belongs to New Line Cinema. I don't know what they're going to do there. Like I said before, the show deals a lot more with the parents, I think. The comic certainly does. We follow the parents, but we don't go on these side quests where Alex's parents reestablish their control of LA by threatening other gang leaders and stuff like that. You know, Gert's parents trying to figure out a way to get away from everybody else. None of this exists in the comic book. They're trying to make the characters far more sympathetic, I think, and more relatable in order for us to care and stretch the story out maybe a little bit more. There is a thing in the comics that really bothered me that I think they're going to attempt to fix in the show, which is the passage of time and money. They're all super rich already in the show, and spoilers, in the show, Alex finds a whole bunch of cash in his dad's drawer along with a gun. That fixed the main problem in the comics, where it goes from, we've been hiding out for a week, we've been hiding out for a month or 2 months. Like right away on the beginning of the show, they say they only have $12 between them and they have to figure out how to feed themselves. That clearly isn't going to be a problem in the television show. And it was a problem for me in the comic because you go to the next issue and they're like, it's been 2 months. And you're like, wait a minute, you only had $12. It's just never addressed. They just have money or have gas for their van. And eventually the other vehicle that they use, where there is an Easter egg in the show, I think, where they call a type of car a leapfrog or something. Spoilers, in the comic, it's literally a giant ship shaped like a frog. They don't give you a reason why it's shaped like a frog or why it jumps instead of flies or drives. But it's a thing, and you roll with it because the comic book is fun and doesn't take itself terribly seriously. So now I want to talk about the ending of the first volume of the comic book. This is probably spoilers for what's going to happen at the end of this season. The Gibborim, I always call them the Gibborim in my mind. Maybe that's just the way Gibborim to me is Gibborim. But the Gibborim, the people who the Pride serve, you find out in the comic, is actually a race, it's 3 in particular, old giants that live underneath the earth and are accessible through this underwater layer that they have. And the idea is every year the Pride sacrifice somebody, and those souls that they get from the sacrifice are fed to the Gibborim for a period of, what is it? Is it 15 years or 25 years? I feel like maybe it's 15 years. That makes more sense with the series, I think. 15 years, or it doesn't matter, whatever. For a period of years long enough for their kids to become, teenagers, basically. But the deal is they feed souls to this thing. In return, their powers, those of them that have physical powers, the sorcery, the mutant abilities, the alien abilities, whatever, are all increased, and then they all get control of Los Angeles. And it's one of those nebulous, I made a deal with the demon, so these things just go my way, I guess. And so the deal is they get to do that because, but the big hook is once these Gibborim are at full strength, they're going to destroy the planet. Because humanity has been mistreating the planet, they're going to put it back to the way it was when they were in charge. And of these servants that they have, only a certain number of them are going to be allowed to survive. It's something like 5 of them or something. Is that right? 5 or 6? But a limited number of them are going to survive. They're like, well, you summoned a bunch of us, so why would we help you? And they're like, well, the prophecy is like a thief and the sorcerer and the time traveler or whatever. You know, there's a reason each one of them was chosen for this task. And it's whoever serves us most faithfully will be the ones that get to go. And what the parents decide, again, big spoilers here, is that they're going to have children. Each one of them is going to have one child, and that child is going to be the one that gets to survive after the world is destroyed. They're going to sacrifice their own lives, and if this is a thing that's going to happen anyway, and it was at a time where it was in the whatever early 80s type of thing. You were looking at the Cuban Missile not the Cuban Missile Crisis. You were looking at the Cold War and the threat of nuclear war. And so at that time, it was like, well, the world's probably going to end anyway in nuclear war. So let's help them destroy the world. And then at the very least, we can guarantee that our kids get to go. And then there's all this talk of the parents wanting to betray one another because it's going to be our kids or my kid, your kid. And then us four parents are going to be the ones that survive. So I guess it must be 6 then. I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, however many kids there are on the show is the number of people that are allowed to survive. And the idea is they're going to give up their place in paradise for their children. And so it's this whole idea of your parents are doing everything for you, but they don't get, they're not letting you have a say. And so it's all this relatable teenager stuff. And so I expect some version of that, but I don't know what the deal is with the church or if it's going to tie into aliens, because that seems to be Marvel's go-to right now. Aliens or Inhumans or whatever, rather than saying that there are giant monsters that live under the streets. Though, through Iron Fist, we already know that there's a giant dragon buried under New York City, spoilers. So, or I guess the Defenders, spoilers. But, yeah. So, obviously, the point I'm making, lots of changes in the show. That is how the first run of the comic book ends, but it continues from there. But I won't tell you the actual ending, because that's the big twist. Not to say there's a big twist coming in the show, I guess. We have absolutely no idea how the show is playing it. And I like that. I think they've taken the idea and the spirit of the comic, and for once, I feel like that Marvel property has done a really good job with it. Well, I guess not for once. I'm tripping over my own words. Iron Man clearly did a good job with it. I think Captain America did a good job of taking those characters and the base of those characters, and then finding a way to put them on the big screen in a way that's accurate enough to please the comic book fans, for the most part, while still being accessible to people who don't read comics. And so I suggest Runaways. I think you guys should go check it out. I'm going to keep watching it. Maybe at the end of the season, I'll do another big thing. But now we're going to move on to the end of the show with a so we're going to close the comic box with issue 77 here. And I want to know what you guys think. Have you been watching Runaways? Have you read Runaways? How do you think the two compare? Do you like one more than the other? If you've only read the comics or watched the show, tell me what you think about that. Like I said, we might return to this later, so I would love to gather up your thoughts and I can share them on the air. If you want, you can reach me at thecomicboxpodcast@gmail.com. You can more easily reach me on Twitter at ComicBoxCast. I'm personally on there at Nobi. We are on Facebook as GeektoGeekCast. We have a subreddit, which is /r/Geek2GeekCast. We have a Slack channel, which is geektogeekcast.slack.com, I think is the invite, or maybe that's the Slack channel. It's one or the other. If you go and you can't get in, put the .slack on the other side of the Geek to Geekcast. We have channels on that Slack for every one of our shows. So if you just want to talk comics, we have one just for the comic box and we can talk Runaways. One more thing I want to bring up before the end of the episode. I saw somebody post this, and I think I shared it on Facebook, that if you start in January and you spend each week watching one Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, starting at the beginning of January, you will perfectly time it to where you're ready to watch Infinity War. I kind of like this idea. However, we run into the issue of the Black Panther movie being in the middle rather than at the end, and we know that I have to do a preview episode, right, a prep episode and a review episode of Black Panther, so that complicates things a little bit. But I want to know what you guys think about this idea, because that would mean that starting at the beginning of the year up until Infinity War, all I'm talking about, or at least what I'll talk about every single week, is watching one of these Marvel movies. And I'm happy to do it, but I want to know if it's something that you guys want to listen to. So maybe we can watch those together and have conversations everywhere. That would be awesome. But let me know. Hit me up on Twitter. Shoot me an email. Hit us up on Slack or on Facebook. We are closing the comic box because I will see you guys next week. As I walk along, I wonder how much of this song I can sing without owing people money. Da-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba. Probably not long, so I sing it out of tune. soon, because now it's a different song. Singing about Runaways on the Hulu. Bye.